Jangan mengantar. Apa ya? Mulai sekarang.
Mr. Nairn, it appears that after your article has been translated by Tirto, there has been a very negative reaction by the Indonesian military, and now Mr. Hary Tanoe who filed a court case against you. How do you respond to those, the military and the Hary Tanoe's response to that?
First, the military threatened to file criminal charges against Tirto. And as soon as they made that threat, I tweeted that if the army was going to threaten brave Indonesian journalists and publishers like Tirto, they should also threaten me. They should file a case not just against Tirto, but also against me. The day after that, the army retreated, and they said they would not be filing any criminal case against Tirto, or against me for that matter. Hary Tanoe, Donald Trump's business partner, who, as I reported, gave money to the FBI coup movement, he did file the criminal charge with the police against Tirto. I would urge him to also file a charge against me if he wants to proceed with that, because I would be very happy to appear in an Indonesian court and discuss the army-backed FBI coup movement and the way it has received support from Tommy Suharto, Hary Tanoe, and a whole series of retired and active generals. And I would also take the opportunity in court to discuss the killing of Indonesian and Timorese and Papuan civilians by the Indonesian armed forces and their longtime work in collaboration with the U.S. Pentagon and U.S. intelligence. So I would welcome a court proceeding, but I deplore the fact that Tirto has been dragged into this. I wrote the article. Tirto merely published a translation, and they should not be persecuted for that. In fact, it's been more than just the threat of court cases and the actual court case. There's been actual physical intimidation against Tirto. From an anonymous account, there was an announcement of a mass action outside that was supposed to take place outside the Tirto office last week. It was canceled at the last minute on 2 occasions, but the Tirto people had to prepare to guard their own physical safety. And it's clearly an attempt by the military and their supporters to suppress free reporting about army activities in Indonesia.
If you're being taken to the court, have you prepared evidence to back up your argument or your accusation against our military general?
Oh, yes. In the article, I discussed the fact that the information came from multiple interviews with active and retired military people over the course of a year, also from military and intelligence documents which I had access to in Indonesia, as well as background information on the FPI and their violent activities. That background information, which came from the Edward Snowden files that he originally got from the NSA and that I had access to via the Intercept. I also had interviews with participants in the FPI pro-coup movement, and I'll be glad to discuss all of that in detail in court. I should note that this has happened quite a few times before. In 2014, I published interviews I had had with General Prabowo years before, in which Prabowo talked about his dreaming about becoming a fascist dictator. He talked about the method for carrying out a massacre in a remote rural village. He insulted former President Gus Dur, said that it was shameful that a blind man like that was commanding the army. And when I published that information, that interview with Prabowo during the 2014 campaign, He immediately demanded that the Army capture me. He demanded that the police capture me. And I responded by saying, silakan, go ahead. I'll be glad. I would be very happy to meet Prabowo face-to-face in court. And then Prabowo retreated from his threat to file charges. He then received a lot of public ridicule. And it was only on the final day of the campaign that Fadli Zon, Prabowo's right-hand man, did file charges, criminal charges against me with the police. I never was contacted by the police. I never saw the documents. But according to the press, the charges that were filed against me related to things like inciting hatred against the Army, even causing Prabowo to lose the election. These are among the things that were reported in the press. Now, as then, I'd be very glad to face the Army or their associates in court.
How much do you think President Jokowi knows about the plan for this coup?
That's a good question. I think he knows a lot. I think President Jokowi was receiving a lot of information as this was going along. And I think the president's response to this has been very significant. After my article came out, General Gatot, the Armed Forces commander, denied it. He said it was a hoax. He said I was crazy. He said Tirto was crazy. And the Army and their supporters in the legislature were calling upon President Jokowi to denounce my article, to deny it, and to say and to support the Army, to say that the Army was loyal to him. But in fact, President Jokowi did not do that, much to the discomfort of the Army. Instead, what President Jokowi did when he was asked by the press about my article, he said, and you can look up the tape, he said essentially, well, don't ask me about the article, ask Allan. And that is not what the Army wanted him to say. So he has a great deal of information about this.
Sir, I want to ask you a question. I'm sorry if this may seem inappropriate for you, but I was just wondering how are you so brave to take on the people you're currently having conflicts with to the court, and especially, mind you, this is Indonesian court, which, as we Indonesians know, there's lots of briberies and stuff, and the legal system here is not really the best in the world.
Right.
Even the press right, even if we have the freedom press law of 1999, yes. How are you so brave about that?
I think that's a very good point about the courts. Clearly, there's been extensive reporting about how corrupt the Indonesian court system is, and I think that's the case. And I would not be surprised that if a case eventually does emerge about this, that pressure and corruption could be a factor in that case as well. But that doesn't really bother me. I'm willing to accept that because a court case would give a forum, a public forum, in which I could go into detail about the crimes committed by the Indonesian armed forces over the years, and their hand-in-glove work with the government of the United States, the government of my country. What I've tried to do in the years that I've been working as a journalist in this way since 1980, when I started in Guatemala, has been to go to countries where the worst mass killings of civilians are taking place and where the U.S. government is directly involved in supporting those killings. So this is involved, and the idea is to try to expose and stop those killings if possible. So I did this in Guatemala, where the Army was massacring Mayan villages in the Northwest Highlands, where they were assassinating students and labor leaders and priests and peasant organizers in the streets outside their homes. In El Salvador, where the U.S. helped to create the Salvadoran death squads. In Honduras and Nicaragua. In Haiti, where the U.S. CIA and DIA helped to create the FRAP death squad. In South Africa, in Palestine, in Burma, and later in East Timor and in Indonesia, including in Jakarta, in Aceh, in Papua. And in all of these cases, these crimes either would not have happened or would not have happened on such a massive scale if not for the direct assistance of the U.S. government, which provided and still provides weapons, training, money, intelligence, and political cover. So what I have always called for in these cases is that the local perpetrators should be brought to trial. In the case of Indonesia and Timor-Leste, people like General Prabowo, General Wiranto, General Hendro Priyono, General Riamizard, General Shafri, along with their American sponsors, those people from the CIA and the White House and the Pentagon and the State Department who enabled them as they were carrying out massacres of civilians. The Indonesians here know very well the stories of the history of these crimes by the military. Perhaps as many as 1 million civilians murdered when the army was consolidating its power in 1965. The invasion of East Timor, which was directly green-lighted by President Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger, which resulted in the killing of 1/3 of the Timorese population, the greatest proportional Holocaust since the Nazis. The ensuing massacres in Aceh and Papua, the massacres at Tanjung Priok, at Talang Sari, the assassination of Munir, the brilliant human rights hero who was also my friend, who was slipped a massive dose of poison by BIN, Indonesian military intelligence, and as a result vomited to death on a plane. That operation, by the way, took place under General Hendro Priyono, who admitted to me when I interviewed him in 2014 that he had command responsibility during that assassination, and that at the time he was working with the US CIA. So I've always said all these people should be brought to trial along with their American sponsors, including the living US presidents. I've urged the Indonesian government to use their rights under local and international law to subpoena and indict American personnel. Now that hasn't happened yet because it's obviously a tall order politically to do that. But at least if I get a forum in a legal proceeding here in Indonesia, I will be able to talk about these things, talk about these facts, and talk about the crimes of the TNI, the Indonesian Armed Forces, and the crimes of the U.S. Pentagon and intelligence and presidents in lending them support. But yes, it may not, who knows if it will be an honest proceeding. We'll see.
Have you contacted your sources for your article? And what if they did, what did they say? Do they feel threatened, or have they said anything?
Well, I don't want to talk about the sources beyond what I wrote in the article, because I have to be very careful about that. But if you may note that in the article I mentioned the two of the sources, just as I was talking to them in the run-up to writing the article, they expressed fears for their own physical safety, which was kind of remarkable because these were not ordinary people. These were rather high military intelligence and intelligence people. But as we've seen with the reaction, the furious army reaction since the article came out, this is a sensitive issue.
Allan, in case, again, I have to repeat again the question, in case if you're being taken to the court, do you have solid proof regarding your accusation, like the recording, probably documents? Yes,
I have full proof, but it's also the case that I will fully protect the sources. So I will be very careful about what I disclose and what I don't, because I don't want sources to get in trouble.
Yeah, but under the Indonesian law, if you're being taken to the court and the judge required you to provide the evidence, then you really have to give them the data. I will fully
comply with the requirements. And I will talk in detail about these matters and the Army FBI coup movement.
So that means that there's possibility you're going to reveal your sources.
Oh no, I will never reveal sources. I will never endanger the sources. That's the most important principle.
So
And for example, this comes up in American courts as well. There have been cases where, on various matters, American journalists have been called into court, and a judge, for one reason or another, has ordered them to reveal the sources. And usually the journalists refuse, and sometimes they even are sent to prison because of that. And I think that's a good practice. I think that's a good tradition on the part of the journalists, and I would continue that. But there's no shortage of evidence about this. In fact, I mean, one thing that I found very interesting is that in talking to Indonesian journalists since the piece came out, a number of them who work at the palace and in the DPR, the legislature, have mentioned that what I wrote in my article was not really news to them, because they had been hearing about this for months. This was well known in elite political and journalistic circles in Indonesia. It was just that nobody was publishing it. And now that it has come out, it's a bit of a shock to the public. But this was something of an open secret among those who were close to the military and the high political circles in Indonesia.
So you mentioned Donald Trump in
Yes.
this article, and he has a business interest with Hary Tanoe and Ancaman and Freeport.
Right.
If it were another president or a hypothetical president, do you think this coup will still will go on, or will it be fall apart?
Well, it's an interesting question, because at this moment, I think the U.S. position regarding this coup movement is not entirely clear. It's been the traditional U.S. position in country after country around the world to first support local militaries and intelligence services, because the U.S. always sees them as the easiest means of wielding influence within a country. But secondly, to, in general, when possible, support an elected president, because that provides a bit of democratic respectability, and it's also seen as producing a more stable political situation. So in this case, in recent years, the U.S. has been supporting both the military and intel, but also President Jokowi. In this case, with Trump coming in as the U.S. president, there's a new added special element, and that is that Trump has these personal ties via Hary Tanoe, via Fadlizon, his main political backer in Indonesia, and also indirectly via Carl Icahn and Freeport McMoran, to this FBI coup movement. So it's not entirely clear whether Trump's personal connections or the traditional institutional U.S. posture will be the one that prevails in the end. So I don't know, and I think many people within the U.S. Embassy don't exactly know who the U.S. will be backing in the end, in this ongoing conflict.
One person mentioned in the article is Gatot Nurmantio.
Yes.
This general is now inside the inner circle of Jokowi's presidency. So how dangerous is this man for the government?
Well, the points that I mentioned in the article were that people within the FBI movement regarded General Gatot as their protector. A number of generals said that he was supportive of the coup movement. The one who said it on the record, because most of them spoke off the record, was General Kivlan, who said that directly. One person alleged to me that President Jokowi himself had said that Gatot is the main factor in the coup. So I then asked a person close to President Jokowi whether it was true. Did the president say that? And they checked and replied, yes, the president did say that in private in a meeting with some of his people. Now, since the article has come out, of course, General Gatot has been very nervous about all this. In fact, there was just a public advertisement released today saying that he was going to appear on the Rossi talk show tomorrow evening to, I guess, to rebut, deny my article. It seems that he is frustrated by the fact that President Jokowi has not backed him up so far. And I think that is telling. I think General Gatot is so nervous and keeps coming back to the theme and keeps hurling personal insults at Tirto and at me and keeps making all these wild threats because it's true, and he knows it's true, and maybe he sees this as endangering his position within the government, and maybe also frustrating the possibilities of the coup movement to now successfully bring pressure to bear on President Jokowi.
Did your source say what will Jokowi do to Gatot?
I didn't discuss that in the article.
Alan, did you aware that Al-Qaeda, the Secretary General of Indonesia Islamic People, has been arrested recently over treason?
Yes.
Was he ever been mentioned in your article?
Yes.
Or do you know how he got involved in the situation?
Yes, I interviewed him before he was arrested. I interviewed him in late February, along with Pakusama, and they spoke openly about the fact that, well, they basically said what the other sources said off the record. They said it on the record. They spoke openly about the fact that their real target was not Ahok, but President Jokowi, about the fact that their main concern was what they described as communism, and by that they meant social movements that the army did not approve of. They spoke openly about the fact that imagine a scenario where during their mass actions, the people went in and occupied the palace and the DPR building, and this led to what they described as chaos and violence, and that would then cause the army to step in and take control, take power. They discussed all these things on the record with me. However, if you'll notice in my original article that in the section where I describe my interview with them, I did not use quotation marks. And I attributed the statements to they. I did not attribute them specifically to one or the other, either to Usama or Katat, because I do not believe in the Makar legal concept. I think it is a repressive concept that is used unjustly. It is routinely used unjustly against dissidents in West Papua who are sometimes every few weeks arrested for attempting to raise the Papuan flag or for speaking in favor of independence. And in this case, the two waves of Makar arrests in December and then at the very end of March, it seems that the evidence that police presented only was able to show that these people were against the government and perhaps wanted to bring it down, but the evidence that they've presented, at least publicly so far, does not seem to prove that they engaged in any violence or that they were gathering weapons or anything like that. So I think the chart, even though I politically very much disagree with all of these people who have been arrested for Makar, I think the Makar charge against them is unjust and repressive. So I in the article, I avoided quoting him directly because I didn't want to contribute evidence that could be used against him in his Makata trial. But that arrest happened after I interviewed him. And then after the arrest, I was contacted by Pak Usama, and he said that he had stepped up to take command of the street movement now that Ustad Katat had been arrested. And that they mentioned earlier during our interview that Katat had taken control of the street movement after Rizak Shihab was hobbled by the pornography charges that the police have been attempting to bring against him.
Allan, how do you see the positions of Polri here? Because as I can see that President Jokowi cannot rely on TNI, right? So how do you think that the rules of the Indonesian police in tackling with this problem?
Well, it seems that there is some division within Polri. There were some Kapolda who supported the coup movement in some places, but it seems the majority of the police hierarchy, especially in Jakarta, have sided with Jokowi. And one very important point I make in the article is that as a result of this coup movement, which has been in large part motivated by the generals' desire to avoid any accountability for their human rights crimes and to avoid even any discussion of those crimes. You know, the symposium on 1965 made them especially angry. As a result of that movement, Jokowi has tightly embraced General Hendro Priyono, who himself has been involved in major crimes, including the Muniat assassination. And Hendro and his people, he has a wide network of people within the military, in civilian life, and also within the police. They have been the ones leading the charge to defend Jokowi against the other military faction. And they have been the ones who have played an important role in bringing, like, the charges against Rizek, the charges against some other movement figures for laundering money for ISIS, the Makar arrests, and so on. And the price that the Hendro Priyono people have extracted for that support for Jokowi has been to pressure Jokowi to stop any possible human rights proceedings against Hendro Priyono. And it was during this period of the coup crisis, this past February, that Jokowi's palace moved to suppress the TPF Muniat, the government-sponsored fact-finding report on the Muniat assassination. This official government report, which was done during the SBA era, specifically named General Hendro Priyono in connection with the Muniat assassination. And legally, the Jokowi government was obliged to make that report public in order to set in train the legal steps that could lead to eventual prosecution, possibly of Hendro Priyono. There was a Jakarta administrative court decision a few months ago that said, yes, the government must make the report public. But then the palace, as part of their deal with Hendro Priyono, appealed that decision, and they brought it to another court, which they pressured, and that court said, no, they don't have to make it public. And as long as that decision stands, that for the moment spares General Hendro from a formal investigation of his role in the Muniat assassination. Even though he admitted to me in our interview that he had command responsibility, he denied ordering it, but he said he had command responsibility. And even though when I pressed him, he said, yes, he was ready to stand trial for that Muniat assassination, and also for his role in the Timor massacres and arson of '99, and in the Talang Sari massacre of Muslim religious activists, in which perhaps 200 civilians were murdered by Hendro's forces. But he has successfully been able to use this coup movement to get out of accountability so far by defending Jokowi against the other military forces. And the Hendro defense team, as it were, has included much of the police.
So how do you see the Muslim populism that has been used by by those people here? Are they just an instrumental, political instrumental just to...
Well, it's a complicated question. I think many of the generals have seen them in that way and have treated them in that way. Many of the participants in the demonstrations themselves, they certainly don't see themselves that way. I talked to people on the streets during these actions, and they spoke about completely different topics than the generals and the FPI movement leaders did. The generals and the FPI movement leaders, they weren't really that interested in issues of religion. They weren't really that interested in Ahok. What they wanted to talk about was Jokowi and how bad he was, and communism, which they claimed was threatening the country. But the people on the street during the demonstrations, they were interested in religious issues and very anti-Ahok. So they had entirely different motivations. But I think in a cynical way, a lot of the military people and the FPI leadership tried to take advantage of that.
One last question, maybe for me. I'm sorry for asking this, but curiosity drives us to make you openly clarify. Besides living sources, what written documents do you have to back up your articles?
Well, I discussed that in the article. Yeah, and it was worded carefully because the origins of the documents can also implicate sources. But you can go back and reread that passage, and there are a number of written documents that directly pertain to this, particularly to issues concerning funding for the movement and the kinds of senior figures who were backing the movement, and also how they did it. There was a great deal of detail that was in these documents that was not yet included in the article.
And you personally have it with you, documents?
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.